As much as I'm excited about Genshin's newest upcoming character, there's already some things that need to be considered, so this video will investigate the whole situation. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by HelloFresh. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I just don't have the energy to go shopping for groceries when there's so much anime I need to catch up with. Luckily, HelloFresh comes to the rescue with their awesome meal kit, and the thing that I love most about it is that as someone who makes guides and values efficiency, they really nailed down the whole step-by-step recipe process, since professional chefs test these dishes out, and the ingredients themselves come pre-portioned to your needs, which means you don't end up with too much or too little of the dish, and that's something that often happens in my household after grocery shopping, so I really value the fact my money doesn't get wasted on excess food. And just like Genshin, there's lots of delicious and seasonal recipes to choose from. My personal favorite right now is lemony spaghetti with Brussels sprouts. So be sure to use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POGGotchaGamer16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts across 6 HelloFresh boxes you'll be getting with free shipping. Most important of all, you'll help support my channel with future videos, so check out HelloFresh now. So normally, I wouldn't make a video this early about a new character, but something caught my eye, and probably yours too, when exploring the new Chasm zone. Now, I won't spoil the story or anything, but unlike with Ayato, the newest upcoming Hydro character, Yelan, actually got revealed in the game's cutscene, and what do you know, she's going to be a bow user. And this is a pretty big deal if you ask me. Not only there's a lot of things to go over regarding her weapon type, but I also wanted to talk about what we should expect from Yelan as a new Hydro character, because I feel like if you've been following Ayato's journey since the first image of him got drip marketed by Hoyoverse, there's actually quite a few things that should help keep our expectations grounded for the most part. Now, if you're not up to date, the biggest thing I was excited about Ayato was the fact Hydro is an extremely useful element in team building. It's basically the core foundation for many meta teams, and in general, it's just a fun element to throw into your team when exploring Genshin's world. Now, the thing that I didn't anticipate was that Ayato's synergy with pyro characters for the most part is limited to Xiangling, and only when he's using his elemental skill actively. The context here, of course, is the Abyss. You can still vaporize from his burst occasionally with other pyro characters, but still, Ayato has found his place in Electro Charge and some freeze teams when clearing the hardest content in the game. Which is why when I look at Yelan right now, my biggest question still remains the same. Will she work with all elements cohesively, or is she going to be best at only some teams instead? Luckily, now that we know her weapon type, this can be answered partially with the first example regarding Hydro application. Even if this might not get used realistically in Abyss, what's cool about bow characters is that they can shoot charge shots and deal their aligned element damage. The best case scenario I can show you would be Child in the international team comp. Yes, normally, you open up his rotation by just tapping his skill, going to Benny's burst, and then Kazuha's burst and skill for double swirling. However, there will be sometimes a case when using his charge shots works as a great alternative to trigger swirls with Kazuha or Sucrose and get those bonuses going. So seeing how Yelan will be able to do the same thing, well, this is a nice amount of wiggle room you get when theory crafting different rotations. It's probably not going to be a big deal, but already it's huge when compared to Ayato, who can only start applying Hydro by either activating his skill or burst, and then awkwardly switching back to swirl with an animal character, which might not be a deal breaker, but it's definitely something worth considering. The other big thing that I kind of forgot to address back when I first talked about Ayato as the newest Hydro character was particle generation. So with the Boba guy, you actually need to remain on the field for up to 7 seconds just to get the particles, and because of this, if you want to utilize him properly, then you basically end up with a mini Raiden that stays around for some time, and then you switch back to other teammates, just so he can unleash his main source of damage and gain those precious particles. So with all of that said, I think I will keep a very close eye on Yelan, especially during the next livestream, and examine how much time she'll need to spend on the field just to get the energy, because if you really think about it, this basically determines the character's role and the rotations you can build with them. But that's basically my 2 biggest takeaways from what I have learned after Ayato's whole journey, right from the first image all the way to his final release. I still love his playstyle and the team he fits into, but I think you'll agree with me that while Hydro characters have insane utility in teams, you never know how they'll turn out. Now that we already know Yelan is a bow user, I want to quickly go over some of the weapon choices because it seems like the developers made it really easy when it comes to picking a strong bow. Like for example, if you're good at aiming and the enemy has a weak spot, you can actually trigger Favonius Warbow passive without needing to build critical rate, and this has been utilized by some players who build Goro as their support, which means you don't have to rely on critical rate at all times. So again, something as simple as a weapon reveal can be a nice thing to consider if you like Yelan's design but will have trouble with obtaining critical rate great on her. And since we're on the same topic, you've probably noticed we barely ever get a new character that works strictly as a dedicated damage dealer, because the last one we had was Ito, and before him you could say it was Yoimiya, and that's only 2 of them out of all Inazuma characters released that had selfish playstyles. But as you can see, these days the developers like to release sub damage dealers instead, and if the trend continues and Yelan also ends up as a sort of like sub damage dealer, there's actually so many bow options to go for, it's kind of crazy. For example, if she has an expensive burst cost, which seems like Hoyoverse is bent on doing for almost every character, then she could use the sacrificial bow if her elemental skill doesn't take up too much field time, but if she can be used as a main damage dealer. There's also Prototype Crescent as a free-to-play option. However, the best thing about bow characters is that literally any of the 5-star bows are great on almost all of them, provided they can be used as sub damage dealers, because even someone like Amber gets attention in the meta if you can equip her with Elegy for the End, which by the way, this is not me telling you should roll on the current weapon banner, and more to emphasize the importance of one weapon providing great utility if you have it, which is why Amber can suddenly become relevant for players who want to use on her the Elegy bow. And that's just few examples I can think of right now. Bow characters in general are really strong in this game. Sure, there are a few examples where you would argue the weapon type barely matters, like if we talk about someone like Kujosara, but for the most part, almost every bow character sees a lot of play in the Abyss, and you gotta give some credit for the amount of weapon choices that exist, especially when something like Stringless has existed as a staple weapon for a good amount of characters. Point is, a weapon type matters a lot. It can potentially help you decide what to focus on when waiting for Yelan, and I think it's a good time to talk about her future. Look, it's pretty clear that time is running out for Inazuma content, and this probably means a new region is on its way. But if that's not enough, there's still some character options that need to be mentioned here while we're waiting for Yelan. First of all, Ayato and Venti double banner is pretty solid. Both characters are great. Ayato fits into many teams and works really well in electrocharge comps, while Venti, who has been compared far too many times to Kazuha, can still dominate over many small enemies, or basically anyone that can be affected by his burst, and this newest Abyss cycle proves he's still got his mojo working. Now for Ayaka, I think it's pretty clear if you've been following any content creator, you'll hear the same opinion that she's a monster of a damage dealer when utilizing her burst and skill, especially when you beef it up with other buffs. So compared to Yelan, there's some good competition to go over, competition that we already know everything about, and considering the fact there's an insane hype building up for Kazuha, judging from the community polls, it's really easy to get lost in so many choices. Obviously, as I mentioned previously, Hydro is really fun and also at the same time crucial for many team builds, so as long as Yelan can make freeze and electrocharge teams work with some kind of Hydro application, then that's already a win in my book. But come on, if you look at all these Hydro characters released so far, you can basically use any of them in freeze and electrocharge teams anyway. However, if she does prove to be capable unit for vaporized teams, where someone like Hutao, Yoimiya, Diluc, and Xiangling can consistently score vape hits while she's off-field, well, that's going to be huge because realistically speaking, the only character who's capable to work in any kind of team and act as a glue for the whole meta so far is the book nerd. By the way, I'm fully aware that not every player bases their choice on character's power level, but I think it's basically a win for everyone if Yelan can be used in any team as a strong support unit, instead of something like sticking with electrocharge comps. Don't get me wrong, this game is too easy once you get to the end game, but I really wish to see a new Hydro character that has a nice strong synergy with a lot of pyro characters. And let's not forget that Hydro is still pretty much a premium element. Even when Child's rerun comes back for the 4th time, it's still mostly 5-star Hydro characters in this list here, and it almost makes me feel suspicious if Hoyoverse is afraid to release a new 4-star Hydro character, because this element is kind of broken if you really think about it, since even with Barbara you can get a lot of things done in quite a few teams. But with all of that said, a small trail of information tidbits have been set officially by Hoyoverse, and starting with Yelan's weapon type, you can already expect some cool things to do with the Hydro elements, while at the same time, looking back on how Ayato's whole journey went from a single PNG to final release also made me realize that while Hydro is extremely powerful in team building, the developers can still find a way to control the character's Hydro application and their role in team builds by tweaking their particle generation. So that's something to consider when we start to get more official info about Yelan, especially if you like to build versatile characters. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I'd really appreciate if you could subscribe to my channel and leave a like to help out with YouTube's algorithm. I'm really excited to see where things will go with Yelan, and I cannot wait until 2.7 arrives. Anyway, thanks for watching, and see you soon.